of domestic abuse. This is a sweeping piece of legislation, and when we are working at pace to drive actions to increase prosecutions across the entire criminal justice system, backed up by a significant investment in our courts to address the backlog.
Annalise Dodds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I regret the Minister does not appear to have seen the figures from this morning. If she had, she would know her government's measures are not working. I thought she would mention additional measures that are required, increasing sentences for stalking and domestic murder, introducing new defences for victims, stopping the social security, family courts and migration systems from failing victims, and making serial abusers subject to special supervision. Labour's called for all of these measures. When will the Conservatives enact them?
Minister.
I can tell the Honourable Lady that the Conservatives are already enacting the vast majority of that long list she's just recited. We are, as I said, we are the first government to put domestic abuse on the statute book, and I would invite her to attend Home Office questions and address the Home Secretary directly to hear about the vast amount of measures that we are doing to protect women and girls in this country, which is a personal priority of the Prime Minister.
John Penrose.
Mr Speaker, does the Minister agree that improving trust in and legitimacy of key public officials and institutions in areas like law enforcement, immigration and health, particularly amongst communities where it has historically been low, is absolutely essential? And what steps does she intend to take to level up in this vital area?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, building trust between different communities and the institutions that serve them was a central theme of the report by the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. We will respond to the report shortly, setting out our plans for building back fairer, and I can assure my honourable friend that his concerns will be at the heart of our response.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Between March and June this year, self-harm for women in prisons grew by a staggering 47%. Is the Minister aware that the best health outcomes for women with children is not incarceration in prison, but a sentence in the community? Can the Minister say how they are pursuing this with the Secretary of State for Justice?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for raising that very important point. I don't have the Ministry of Justice's figures to hand, but what I can do is get one of my colleagues in that department to write to her with a more specific and comprehensive answer to her question.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister agree that it's time to better protect women from abuse and harassment, and the vehicle to do this is the online safety bill?
Minister.
So I fully agree with my honourable friend. No one should feel afraid to participate in our democracy. Intimidation in public life can stop talented people, such as my honourable friend and others from minority backgrounds, from standing for public office.
Jamie Stone.
Mr Speaker, when it comes to inequalities, young carers very often lose out. I wonder if I could invite the government to come and look at a wonderful organisation in Wick called Clicks, who really are delivering a service that means a huge amount to young people.
Show State.
Well, I'm sure we'd be very keen to do that.
Better.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Dame Laura Cox recently argued that the macho behaviour and posturing so frequently displayed in our political debates have disproportionately and adversely affected women in public life. Not just politicians, but women journalists, academics, campaigners and political activists who have all reported instances of intimidation, abuse and even physical violence. What does the Minister believe we can do collectively to change this culture?
Anybody want it? Secretary.
Well, the honourable lady is right. We do need to deal with the culture in our politics, and we need to make sure that we are having rational, reasonable debates, and I think we're demonstrating that today.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. I don't think we need any more. If you listen to this next bit, might help. Before we I wish to make one further point. There are many reflections on Sir David Amos's decency and kindness at a very moving Requiem Mass held yesterday. I sincerely hope that those qualities of kindness, decency, are reflected in our proceedings today and in the future. I now call the Prime Minister. Chris Bryant, number one.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. Thank you. Thank you very much. Immediately following PMQs, I will attend the Welcome Home march-in to thank all those involved in pitting our evacuation from Kabul. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Chris Bryant.
I too will be attending I too will be attending in a few minutes. Nicky's 7-year-old son had 37 seizures a day because of a brain disease he suffered from. He's had surgery now, but it's a struggle every day to get him to stay in school. Nicky, is supporting the acquired brain injury bill because she believes that the government needs to have a cross-departmental strategy for supporting those who've had an acquired brain injury, whether that's rugby players with concussion and dementia, it's women who've been beaten in the head by their partners, it's people who've had brain injuries due to children who've had suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning, soldiers who've been in explosions. I really hope that the government is going to back the acquired brain injury bill. But above all, we need a strategy to help the 1.4 million people in this country. Will he give us that?
Prime Minister.
I want to thank the Right Honourable Member for raising this vital issue and for his commitment to this cause, his personal commitment. And I can assure him that we are studying his proposed bill and working to ensure that people do get the support for the acquired brain injuries that they have received. And what we can certainly pledge at this stage to do, and I hope this will be of some use to him and the many who care about this issue in the way that he does, and as I'm sure members do across the House, the Department of Health and Social Care will lead on the development of a cross-departmental government strategy on acquired brain injury and other neurological conditions. I'll be very happy to share details with him shortly.
Felicity Buchan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In July of this year, my constituency, Kensington, suffered devastating flooding, with more than 2,000 homes flooded, a river running down Portobello Road, and a lot of residents having to move into temporary accommodation. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that Thames Water needs to come up with short and long-term solutions, and they need to make sufficient investment in infrastructure to prevent events like this happening again?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise flooding, Mr. Speaker, and she's right about short and long-term solutions, and that's why I'm proud, amongst other things, to have helped instigate the Thames Tideway Tunnel, with the biggest super sewer in the history of this country, which will help to deal with what happens in London when the Basingstoke interceptors overflow, and to deal with flooding throughout the city.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the last election, the Prime Minister promised that nobody would have to sell their home to pay for care. That's another broken promise, isn't it?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker. Because if he looked at what we are proposing, and if he supported what we are proposing, which is fixing something that Labour never fixed in all their years in office, Mr. Speaker, we are saying to the people of this country that we will disregard your home as part of your assets if you and your spouse are living in it. And number two, Mr. Speaker, you can have a deferred payment agreement if you move out of it and you're living in residential care. You can have a deferred payment agreement. But most important of all, Mr. Speaker, by putting the huge investment that we are making now in health and social care, And we are allowing, for the first time, the people of this country to insure themselves against the potentially catastrophic, the otherwise catastrophic costs of dementia or Alzheimer's, Mr. Speaker. And even if you're not one of those people who suffer from those afflictions, we are taking away the anxiety from millions of people up and down the land about their homes.
Keir Starmer.
I think the Prime Minister just described the broken system he said he was fixing. So it's certainly not a straight answer. Let's have another go. Let's have another go. He used to say, I see they turned up this week, Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, he used to say that...
Sorry. I don't think I need any further. Yesterday we had a very good example of the house being at its best in that church, in that cathedral. Please, let's show some respect. I want to be able to hear not only the Prime Minister but the Leader of the Opposition. Shouting each other down doesn't do you or your constituents any good. We need to hear the questions, and I certainly need to hear the answers. And if anybody doesn't like it, please leave now. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it's not a complicated question, so let's have another go. He used to say that nobody would have to sell their home to pay for their care. It's in his manifesto right here. On the basis of that promise, he then put up tax on every working person in the country. So has he done what he promised and ensured that nobody will have to sell their home to pay for care? Yes or no? It's not complicated.
Prime Minister.
No, it's not complicated, Mr. Speaker, because what we're doing is disregarding your home as part of the assets that we calculate. So if you go down to £100,000, that's the beginning where we will ask you to contribute. But your home is not included in that, Mr. Speaker. And they have absolutely no plan. They've spent decades failing to address this. And only a few weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, they failed to vote for the £36 billion that will enable us to fix this and to help people up and down the country, not just to fix the social care problem, but to pay for people to live in their own homes, Mr. Speaker, and receive the care they need in their homes. That's what this One Nation Conservative government is doing. Why won't he support it?
Mr. Speaker, he's had two opportunities to stand by his manifesto commitment and he's not taken them. Well, it says he just has. So let's test this in the real world, Prime Minister. Under the Prime Minister's plans, a person with assets worth about £100,000, most of it tied up in their home, would have to pay £80,000. They'd lose almost everything. How on earth does the Prime Minister think that they can get their hands on that kind of money without selling their home?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have a third go trying to clear this up in the befuddled mind of the right honourable gentleman opposite, because it is important, and the fact is that the party opposite have totally failed to address it. They haven't had the guts to fix this in all their time in office. It's something left over. It's something left over from the Attlee government, and we are fixing it. And let me repeat for the third time, Mr. Speaker, since your home is disregarded. Number two, even if you have a second home in your residential care, Mr. Speaker, you have a deferred payments agreement if you want. And number three, Mr. Speaker, we are allowing you to insure yourself for the first time against the catastrophic cost by capping it at £86,000, Mr. Speaker. And now he stood on a manifesto to put the cap where, Mr. Speaker? At £100,000, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
The question was very simple, and it's the question all of his backbenchers answered. If you've got a house worth about £120,000, £140,000, how do you find £80,000+ without selling your home? It's common sense. Strip away the bluster, strip away the deflection, strip away the refusal to answer the question. There's a simple truth, and this is why the Prime Minister won't address it. People will still be forced to sell their homes to pay for care. That accounts... Why did they... Look at the vote the other day to see the answer to that question. They'll still be forced to sell their home. It's another broken promise. Just like he promised that he wouldn't put up tax. Just like he promised 40 new hospitals. just like he promised a rail revolution in the north. Mr. Speaker, who knows if he'll make it to the next election? But if he does, how does he expect anyone to take him and his promises seriously?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yet again he raises the rail revolution in the north. And the 3 new high-speed lines, Mr. Speaker, 96 billion pounds. Nothing like it. Again, nothing like it, Mr. Speaker. Nothing like it for a century. And just for the advantage of what I didn't even know this. I was in a state of complete innocence about this last week, Mr. Speaker. But it turns out that the right honourable gentleman actually campaigned against HS2 altogether. Said it would be devastating and said it should be cancelled. I can tell you something, Mr. Speaker. HS2 runs through my constituency as well. And I took a decision, even though it's been very tough for my constituents, I took a decision that it was the right thing to do for the long-term interests of the whole country. How can they possibly trust that man?
Mr. Speaker, I think he's lost his place in his notes again. The only thing he's delivering is high taxes, high prices and low growth. I'm not sure the Prime Minister should be shouting about that. And it isn't just broken promises, it's also about fairness. Everyone needs protection against massive health and care costs. But under his plans, someone with assets worth about £100,000 will lose almost everything. Yet somebody with assets of about £1 million will keep almost everything. It's just like their 2017 manifesto all over again. Only this time, something has changed. He's picked the pockets of working people to protect the estates of the wealthiest. How could he possibly have managed to devise a working-class dementia tax?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've answered that question 3 times already. This does more for working people up and down the country than Labour ever did. Because we're actually solving the problem that they failed to address. We're disregarding your housing asset altogether, Mr. Speaker, while you're in it. And he talks about jobs, he talks about working people. Well, let me just remind him. There's just one key statistic that people should bear in mind. It's now almost a month after furlough ended. He talks about the economy, Mr. Speaker. There are now more people in work than there were before the pandemic began. And that's because of the policies this government has pursued.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, there's no getting away from it. Working people are being asked to pay twice. During their working lives, they'll pay much more tax in national insurance, whilst those living off wealth are protected. And then when they retire, Mr. Speaker, they face having to sell their home when the wealthiest won't have to do so. It's a classic con game, a Covent Garden pickpocketing operation. The Prime Minister's the front man, distracting people with wild promises and panto speeches, whilst his Chancellor dips his hand in their pocket. But now the Prime Minister's routine is falling flat. His Chancellor is worried that people are getting wise. His backbenchers say it's embarrassing. Your words. Your words. And senior people in Downing Street tell the BBC it's just not working. Is everything okay, Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I tell you what's not working. It's that line of attack. Because I just want to repeat. I want to repeat the crucial point, Mr. Speaker. We're delivering for the working people of this country. We're delivering for the people of this country, were fixing the problems that they thought could never be fixed. We're doing the things that they thought were impossible. And let me repeat, there are now more people in work in this country, jobs up, with their wages going up, Mr. Speaker, than there were before the pandemic began. And that is because of the policies that this government has followed. Whether it's on rolling out the vaccine, if you remember that he opposed, whether it's on investment that he opposed. He did, Mr. Speaker, he didn't want to invest in the vaccine task force. I seem to remember. Or whether it is making the strategic investments that we have. If we listened to Captain Hindsight, Mr. Speaker, we would have no HS2 at all, because that was what he stood for. And if we listened to him, we would all still be in lockdown, Mr. Speaker.
Can the Prime Minister confirm that he will use the rest of the UK's presidency of COP to urge countries around the world to make good on the pledges that they made in Glasgow? And does he agree with me that decarbonisation can create millions of jobs across the UK and around the world?
Prime Minister.
I totally agree with my right honourable friend, who's right about this and many other things, and that's why our transition to green jobs is supporting 440,000 new green high-wage, high-skilled jobs across the UK, and the breakthrough agenda that we had endorsed at COP26, I believe will support between 20 and 30 million jobs across the world by 2030, and I think that's probably a gross underestimate.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure you will wish to join me and indeed the rest of the House in welcoming the moderator of the Church of Scotland to the gallery today, Lord Wallace, and to thank him for his sage words at his sermon this morning. Mr. Speaker, the past few weeks have shown this Tory government at its very worst. A Tory sleaze and corruption scandal on a scale not seen since the 1990s. Tory cuts and tax rises that will leave millions of people worse off. A litany of broken promises, from HS2 to carbon capture, social care, the triple lock on pensions. And who can possibly forget the £20 billion bridge to Ireland that evaporated into thin air? At the centre of all this is one man, a Prime Minister who is floundering in failure. So, can I ask the Prime Minister, with his party falling in the polls, his colleagues briefing against him, has he considered calling it a day before he's pushed out the door?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think what the people of this country want to hear is less talk about politics and politics, and they want to talk about what the government is doing for the people of Scotland. And what the Scottish government is doing for the people of Scotland, which isn't enough, Mr. Speaker. But what we will do, he talks about infrastructure investment, and I can tell him that if he will wait till I think till Friday or later this week, he's going to hear about what we're going to do with the Union Connectivity Review to ensure that the people of Scotland are served with the connections that they need, and which the Scottish Nationalist Party has totally failed to put in.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That certainly wasn't an answer to the question I asked, but we're used to that. And I didn't expect the Prime Minister to take responsibility, because he never does. But this isn't just about the chaos in the Conservative Party. It's about the state of the United Kingdom under his failing leadership. Because whilst the Prime Minister spends his time hunting for chatty pigs and staving off a leadership challenge from the Treasury, in the real world, Mr. Speaker, people are suffering a Tory cost of living crisis. Brexit is hitting the economy hard, but the Prime Minister can't even give a coherent speech to business. The Prime Minister's officials have lost confidence in him. Tory MPs have lost confidence in him. The letters are going in, and the public have lost confidence in him. Why is he clinging on when quite clearly he simply isn't up to the job?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I might ask the right honourable gentleman what on earth he thinks he is doing, talking about party political issues, when what the people of Scotland want to hear is what on earth the Scottish National Government is doing. They're falling in the polls, Mr. Speaker. They're their cause. Yes, they are. Their cause is falling in the polls. And considering their manifold failures on tax, on education, and all the things the people of Scotland really care about, I'm not surprised. And I can see some agreement on the benches opposite.
Jonathan Lord.
Mr. Speaker, I celebrate the recent successes of Woking College, my local sixth form college, and I welcome the recent government investment for a new teaching block, which will allow it to expand. Many colleges and students find BTECs to be a really valuable qualification and course, enabling progress into higher education and skilled employment. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we should protect student choice and keep BTECs as an option for students?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we will continue. I thank my honourable friend. We will continue to fund some BTECs where there's a clear need for them. But I must stress to him that we've got to close the gap between the things that people study and the needs of business and employers, and that's what T-levels are designed to do.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rarely agree with the Prime Minister, but last week, when he said that COP26 showed that we can end our reliance on fossil fuels, I did agree with him. But that begs the question as to why his government is pressing ahead not just with the Cambo oil field, but with 39 other oil, gas and coal developments, which would amount to 3 times the UK's current annual climate emissions. Now, I don't want an answer about all the things he thinks he is doing on cars and cash and trees. I want him to tell the House if he will leave those fossil fuels in the ground, will he cancel those projects? And does he recognise that if he doesn't, he will need to ask for forgiveness, not just for losing his place in a speech, but for losing the future of our children?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are not only powering past coal, going to an end to fossil fuel reliance in our energy generation at all by 2024, which is an absolutely stunning thing ahead of countries around the world. I'm glad that she's praising me for that. The Cambo oil field, as she knows, is for study by an independent regulator. But what we have also done, and led the world in this, Mr. Speaker, is stopped the financing of overseas hydrocarbons. And that is a fantastic thing which the whole world followed.
Dr. Andrew Murris.
Mr. Speaker, net zero, levelling up and building back better can't happen unless we have a massive increase in the supply of critical tech minerals like silicon, copper and lithium. But Beijing controls most of them. Noting China's recent tech minerals leverage on Japan, does he agree with me that the success of our green industrial revolution hinges on advancing our indigenous Silicon Valley? And free of the EU, what fiscal incentives can he now provide to make it happen at pace?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that. And as he knows, there are some very, very interesting and potentially very lucrative sources of minerals such as lithium in this country, whose exploration, discovery and reuse we are encouraging. But secondly, on the tax point that he rightly raises, we're going to use free ports to ensure that we support them as hubs for the processing of those critical minerals here in the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2014, my constituent's 3-year-old son, Freddie Hussey, was killed by an unsafe trailer. Every year, 30% of people who do the B+E test fail it. And now the government is abolishing that test, unleashing thousands of untrained, untested, unsafe drivers onto our roads. Why is the government breaking its promise to grieving families to make towing and our roads safer?
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much for raising this with me, and I'm very sorry to hear about the tragic circumstances of Freddie's death. And what we want to do is to free up B&E licensing time so that we get more people qualified as HGV drivers. But that cannot compromise road safety, as she rightly says. So we will review the legislation and its consequences at regular intervals.
Thank you, Speaker. On the 2nd to 5th of December, Lincoln will be hosting its world-famous Christmas market in the grounds of the historic Lincoln Castle. And it it would be remiss of me not to invite my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and yourself, Speaker, and all other colleagues, even the opposition front bench, to come and enjoy the marvellous long weekend of festivities. However, what is less than marvellous for my constituents is the levelling down of Lincolnshire's highway maintenance grant by 25% on 2019 to 2020 levels. Can my right honourable friend use his influence to cause the Treasury and DfT to revisit this unfortunate decision? Restoring this grant back to 1920 levels is imperative to the safety of my constituents, whether in vehicles, cycling or walking, as I would hope my right honourable friend would agree.
Yeah. Minister.
Well, I thank you very much for his question. I'll do my utmost, as I'm sure all other. He's invited everybody. So I'm sure a lot of people are going to be going to Lincoln, I hope. But I'm sure that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, would have listened very carefully to what he had to say.
Hannah Baldwin.
Inexplicable, Mr Speaker, is how former Vaccine Task Force Chair Kate Bingham described his government's decision to cancel its contract with Livingston-based vaccine developer Valneva, a company the Prime Minister has himself visited. She also noted how shoddily Valneva have been treated and how damaging his government's decision has been for UK life sciences, exports and for jobs in my Livingston constituency, where a state-of-the-art vaccine manufacturing plant now lies unfinished. There has been no apology to the incorrect statements in the House, so can the Prime Minister please meet with me and representatives from Valneva, and will he tell me whether his government has tabled any proposals to reach an amicable resolution which was promised at the dispatch box, and if not, when will he do so?
Minister. Yes, I thank her very much. And I was personally very disappointed when we couldn't get approval for the Valneva vaccine in the way that we had hoped, and I know how disappointing that was to colleagues in Scotland. I will certainly make sure that she gets the relevant meeting. But what we are doing is investing massively in this country's vaccine capability across the country, so that we are prepared for the next pandemic. And I very much hope that Valneva will be part of that.
Nigel Bills.
Thank you. We know that serious side effects from the COVID vaccines are very rare, but for my constituent Sarah Kite that wasn't the case, and she suffered a very serious reaction, leaving her in constant pain and losing most of her eyesight, and she now can't work. The Prime Minister successfully and quite rightly speeded up all the vaccine processes except one, the vaccine damage payment system. Can we now get on with making those payments so people who have suffered these very, very serious reactions can get the financial support they need?
Prime Minister.
Yes. I thank him very much, and I just want to reassure him and indeed to reassure the House and the country that cases such as the very sad one that he raises are extremely, extremely rare, and we're putting more money in to gather evidence for claims such as the one that he describes. But I want to repeat perhaps the most important message I can get across again today, Mr. Speaker. I want to repeat how vital that vaccination programme is, how safe it is, and how important it is that everybody who is eligible gets their booster when they're called.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's integrated review concluded that the Chinese state poses a systemic challenge to our national security, and the Prime Minister has made clear that when it comes to China, we must remain vigilant about our critical national infrastructure. Can he therefore confirm today, unequivocally, that plans for China General Nuclear to own and operate its own plant in Bradwell in Essex have been abandoned, and explain to the House precisely how and when his government intends to remove CGN's interest from the Sizewell C nuclear project?
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much for his question, a very important issue that he raises, and clearly one of the consequences of our approach on critical national infrastructure, the National Security and Investment Bill, is that we don't want to see undue influence by potentially adversarial countries in our critical national infrastructure, and so that's why we've taken the decisions that we have. And on Bradwell, there will be more information forthcoming. But what I don't want to do, Mr. Speaker, is pitchfork away wantonly all Chinese investment in this country, or minimise the importance of this country of having a trading relationship with China.
Daniel Kuczynski.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be very pleased that Shrewsbury Conservatives are doing everything possible to help Neil Shastri Hurst, the excellent candidate in North Shropshire, But he will also know that the #1 issue affecting Salopians at the moment is the £312 million that we've secured for a modernisation of our A&E services. This has suffered terrible delays over the last 8 years, leading to a worsening of our A&E services for local patients. Will he do everything possible to help us get this finally across the line so that we can provide safe A&E services for all the people of Shropshire and Mid Wales?
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and that's one of the reasons why we're investing £36 billion more in our NHS now to help cope with the backlog, the extra winter pressures, particularly on A&E. But it's also a reason why the booster programme is so vital, because we don't want those beds filled with COVID patients, and we don't want delayed discharges either.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So far, his government have found billions for nuclear, but nothing for the Scottish carbon capture cluster, nothing for pump storage hydro, and now are at risk of failing the tidal stream generation, a technology Scotland's a world leader in. Now, the ask is for a £71 million ring-fenced marine pot in next month's energy auction. So the Prime Minister's got a choice: provide this money and allow continued scale-up and commercial success based on a UK supply chain, or see the manufacturing jobs move abroad. What's it going to be?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm so glad he asked that question, because I can tell him, and I can tell his right honourable friend, the leader of the SNP in Westminster, that we will be including a support for tidal stream. For tidal stream in the upcoming to the value of £20 million. Come on. Not to be sneezed at. Not to be sneezed at, Mr. Speaker. In the upcoming Contract for Difference auction, I've met representatives of Scottish Tidal Power. I think it's fantastic, original, inventive what they're doing. We want to support it.
Sir David Evelyn.
Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, I've been out campaigning with our excellent candidate in Bexley, Sidcup, Louis French, for the by-election, and responses on the doorstep are very good. The opposition know nothing as usual. Can my right honourable friend confirm that he will continue to implement our 2019 manifesto and implement policies to ensure that we build up better for the whole country, including London, because this is what the electors in Bexley want?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can, and I have happy memories over many years of campaigning with my honourable friend in Bexley and Sidcup. And I can tell him that we are delivering on our agenda for the people of London, putting 20,000 more police out on the street and making sure that they get to outer London boroughs as well, and making sure that Londoners do not suffer from the crazed outer London tax that would see motorists penalised by the Labour mayor for driving into their own city.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Cherwell Larder in Kidlington does incredible work serving nearly 2,000 of my most vulnerable constituents, but at the moment there simply isn't enough food to go around. And this is a national crisis. Stock for charities like Fair Share is down 30%, in part due to the same supply chain issues that are affecting supermarkets. So will the Prime Minister help the Cherwell Larder, firstly by restoring the funding to Fair Share, but also what more can he do to incentivise businesses to give away surplus food this winter so that no family need go hungry this Christmas?
Prime Minister. I want to thank her for raising Fair Share and what they're doing to support people this winter and indeed at all times. But I would also say that my experience of business is that they do an amazing job of contributing to this effort. Iceland is one of the companies that springs to mind. But on the supply chains, we're addressing it night and day, and we are seeing some of the problems starting to ease. They are the result, Mr. Speaker, of the British and the world economy coming back into life, which, quite frankly, would not have happened if we listened to the gentleman opposite. Just remind you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend, the Prime Minister, was bang on Monday when he spoke about ending the unfairness of our high energy-intensive industries paying more than they pay overseas. So we know he is a friend to steel in Scunthorpe. So will he continue to do all that he can to ensure that my world-class steelmakers are on a fair footing?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend and everything she does for steel and for Scunthorpe, and I can tell her that I do believe that British Steel has suffered as a result of decisions taken years and years ago from unfair energy costs. We need to fix it, and this government is getting on and making another of the long-term changes we're instituting, Mr. Speaker. We're putting in the nuclear baseload that this country has long been deprived of.
John Speller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be introducing a bill to ban the import of hunting trophies. Not only does that have widespread public support and support from opposition parties, but in the past the principle has been supported by Conservative manifestos, the Queen's Speech, and indeed by yourself. So, Prime Minister, on Friday the 10th of December, will you tell your whips not to block the bill, but to let it go forward so we can work together and end this vile trade as soon as possible?
The honourable gentleman is completely right, and that's why we're going to introduce legislation this Parliament to ban the import of hunting trophies and delivering the change that we promised, and I hope that he will support it.
Sir Mike Penning.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister cheered all of my constituents up when he came to South West Hertfordshire and said we were going to have a new hospital. Sadly, Prime Minister, even though the money's there, the local management of our trust have blocked it. They're going to refurbish Watford and not give us a brand new hospital on a greenfield site, which is what we want. Prime Minister, will you meet me and some of my constituents to unblock this and tell the NHS they need to build a new hospital for Hemel Hempstead?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to my friend. I do remember the issue being raised with me when I was with him. I'll be very happy to secure a meeting with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, and I'm sure we'll be able to unblock things one way or the other.
Tom Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scots stood slack-jawed this week with astonishment at the news that the Prime Minister has abandoned his DUP bridge to Northern Ireland. Perhaps he'll offer hot air balloons for the crossing instead and inflate them himself. Broken bridge promises to Scotland, broken rail promises to Northern England. With buyer's remorse consuming the Tory backbenchers, who does he think will be defenestrated first? His hapless Tory leader in Scotland or himself?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to remind the Scottish Nationalist Party that they are there to represent the people of Scotland and to deliver better services, better transport, better healthcare, and what we are delivering. He talks about transport, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell him what I said to the leader of the SNP in Westminster. What we are delivering is the first thoroughgoing review of union connectivity, so that we look properly at all those roads, the A75, the A77, the A1, all those vital connections for the people of Scotland that have been neglected by the SNP, that this government is going to fix.
Final question, Miriam Kate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm absolutely delighted with the £500 million Start for Life funding that was announced in the budget. And my right honourable friend knows from personal experience how important those early years are, whether that's parenting advice, access to healthcare or age-appropriate theme parks. So does he agree that rolling out family hubs to 75 local authority areas is a great start? But can he confirm that if this is a successful programme, the government's aim is to roll it out across the whole country?
Prime Minister.
Yes. I thank her very much, and she's totally right in what she says about Start for Life, and I'm just seeing if my right honourable friend is still in her place, which he's vanished. But I want to thank my right honourable friend, the member for Northampton, because she has championed this for many, many years. She is right. Mr. Speaker, investment in kids' early years is absolutely crucial. That's why this government has begun Start for Life. And yes, if it works, Mr. Speaker, we will roll it out across the country.
We're now going to come to the urgent questions. For those who need to leave, please do so. You're right. Too lively. I know. You're right. See you. No problem. Look after yourselves. Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm always nice. We now come to the urgent question. I call the Shadow Secretary of State, Edmund Lavan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy if you will make a statement